Welcome to Uninvited, the show where we cover news that matters to Ontario women. On this program, we're discussing the future of long-term care in Ontario. There's been over 4,200 COVID-related deaths in long-term care, yet for-profit homes continue to cash in on seniors' care. It's clear this system needs a complete overhaul, yet nothing has changed. But first, here are some recent headlines. On a previous program, we told you about the many issues with Doug Ford's Highway 413 plan, from damaging the environment to dubious cost estimates and a lack of transparency. Well, it's now part of an official strategy for transportation across southern Ontario. The government is calling it Connecting the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and it promises $82 billion in funding to expand highways and build public transit over the next 10 years if re-elected. Green leader Mike Schreiner said it best, quote, "Ford's transportation plan is going to pave over our children's future. Building highways that will increase emissions and in some cases pave over farmland and have little impact on commute times makes little sense, yet the government seems intent on forging ahead." Education Minister Stephen Lecce has revealed sweeping changes to Ontario's science, technology, engineering, and math curriculum. This is all set to roll out in September. Lecce says the curriculum will better equip students, but teacher unions are once again slamming the government for not providing enough supports or training to get teachers up to speed in time for the September launch of the curriculum. Currently, teachers will only be given one professional activity day to focus on STEM learning. The head of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario compared this latest rollout to the province's changes to the math curriculum, where boards were left holding the bag trying to implement a new curriculum with little support from the province on a compressed timeline. And on top of that, it's setting a fragile education system up for failure, as this is a system still trying to bounce back from COVID. The price of an average home in the Greater Toronto Area continues to make the idea of home ownership a challenge. The average home price went up nearly 28% compared to the same time last year, and the average selling price is now over $1.3 million. With June's provincial election coming up, it's expected affordability will be a dominant campaign issue, with more and more no longer able to afford to enter into the housing market in Canada's largest city. Justin Trudeau promised to make housing more affordable as a staple of his re-election campaign, but is yet to deliver on anything to help cool the housing market. And provincial policies, those don't seem to be making a difference in tackling this issue either. So much of our healthcare system seems to be on the verge of falling apart, from shortages of staffing in acute care, a lack of family doctors, and more. And one of the worst areas is our long-term care system. And that's a topic of today's program. Now, most news organizations, they've chronicled the failings of Ontario's cash for care system well before the pandemic highlighted it for all to see. Inconsistent staffing, allegations of abuse, and lax regulation fed an industry where cash reigned king over the care of our most vulnerable at for-profit long-term care homes. As new allegations surfaced, minister after minister, government after government all made promises to do better, but nothing changed. Then in March 2020, when COVID-19 hit Ontario, it spread like wildfire, laying to bear a painful truth, just how horribly we treat our elderly here in Ontario. That for-profit model really came under the microscope as well through the pandemic. Companies who made profits off the backs of seniors had to defend how they treat them, as thousands died in their homes. Now many are facing class action lawsuits, as the province made it harder to sue those cash for care operations for their alleged negligence. For-profit homes had twice as many COVID-19 infections and 78% more deaths compared to nonprofit or municipally run homes. It became so bad at so many homes that the Army had to be called in and care for those in need. And what they found was nothing short of horrific. At one long-term care home in Toronto, they found that more than 24 residents died of dehydration, while others lived in rooms where feces and vomit were on the floors and walls. The Canadian Forces alleged neglect and malnutrition and went as far as to say COVID-19 deaths at one home, quote, paled in comparison to general deaths. The military also wrote, they died when all they needed was water and a wipe down. So despite a promise by Doug Ford that a so-called iron ring would be formed around long-term care in subsequent waves, that didn't happen and deaths continued to mount. 2 years later, Ontario is spending money to build new homes, but despite calls from workers and policy think tanks like the Centre for Policy Alternatives to end the cash for care model, which has proven from reports to be the lived experience of so many to be a failed model, the province is instead partnering with these same companies that were responsible for some of the deadliest outbreaks as part of their plan for the next 30 years. All the while, staffing issues that contributed to those early outbreaks were continuing to this very day. A survey of the Ontario Health Coalition found 95% of long-term care staff said their facility was short-staffed, and 53% of respondents saying daily shortages of staff have persisted since the onset of the pandemic. Staffing plays a major role in not only the quality of care received, but the quality of life and well-being for residents. It means everyone in the system is suffering. And this affects women disproportionately. The bulk of the workers in the sector are women. Many are racialized or new to Canada, and women also account for a majority of residents in long-term care. So what is the future of long-term care in Ontario? Does it truly mean the status quo where companies reap profits off of seniors' care? With over 4,200 COVID-related deaths in long-term care since April 2020, how many more seniors need to suffer and die before we overhaul this crumbling system? Today, we're joined by Julie Perl, whose mother was a resident in a GTA long-term care home, and Jocelyn Borras, a registered practical nurse in long-term care. Julie's mom passed away in the fall, but Julie continues to act as an advocate for residents and as a chair of the Family Council to ensure someone in the system stands up for better care and higher standards. And Jocelyn, she battles the major challenges in this system every single day as a frontline worker. Julie, Jocelyn, thank you for joining us on Uninvited. Julie, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in long-term care homes with your mom?
Absolutely. We first experienced it back in 2015. My mother was living at home, but broke her femur, and was in a wheelchair for 3 months. She is legally blind, and there was no one to look after her during the day. So we looked at long-term care for her. In going to homes to research where we'd like her to live was devastating. The number of long-term care homes we saw and the people living in those homes, I had nightmares at night.
Why?
I just felt they looked abandoned. There were so many lonely faces, and it wasn't a type of place we wanted my mother to go and live in. She was quite vibrant, loved music, loved family conversation, and putting her into one of those homes was causing us stress. But it was a system that is so broken, and had I not been there with her every day, or my brother had not been with her almost every day, I don't think she would have survived longer than a month or two.
I'm going to get back to your story because I want to bring in Jocelyn. Jocelyn, you're a registered practical nurse. You spend a lot of your time in long-term care homes among the amazing frontline workers that Julie referred to. So tell us a bit about yourself and your work and how you've been finding it.
I've been working like 13 years now in a long-term care. That is my full-time job, and I also have a part-time job in the hospital. So for me, long-term care is my second home. You have your specific residence. You're dealing with that every day, same residence, same family member. We care a lot, but the workload is it's changing, but the workload, the workforce, or the ratio of the residents from staff are not changed since from before. So it means I can give an example for the pre-SW. In the morning, they have to take good care of 9 residents, 9 to probably 10, because of the shortages of staff. Sometimes we have 10 to 12. So in the morning, early in the morning, they are running to get them up, to get the residents up in the bed so they can prepare for breakfast. And after that, you have to Mostly they need help for feeding. So for 10, can you imagine if you have 10 residents you need to get them up in 1 hour to ensure that everyone is ready for breakfast. So what do you expect? Especially right now, mostly they come to us with a behavior because of the medical diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, even the developmental delay. So it's a lot of challenging. The workload is really too much. It's really excessive. But since become pandemic, it's more workload, it's more complicated.
I noticed a huge decline in the residents that lived on my mom's floor and unit. Going in 5-6 years ago, they were vibrant, they were walking, they were talking, they were really engaging. And those same residents and new residents coming in have more complex care needs. People like myself and others are unable to care for their aging loved one at home. And unless you're super rich or a millionaire, you're not able to afford home care.
There's a lot of research in long-term care, and they identified already the gap. But the problem is the government, they don't fix the gap. They know already what's going on inside the long-term care, especially during the pandemic. And like the mandated that even the initial caregiver or the family member, they are not able to come and visit their own loved ones in the long-term care. So it's so sad for us because we are the one there taking good care of them. And then we get also infected. And then we don't have support, we don't have extra support. So we end up like always short on a daily basis.
That's Jocelyn's perspective from inside and working in a home. From your perspective, Julie, as someone whose mother was in a home during these past 2 years, what was that like?
It was the worst experience of my life. The day that the pandemic was actually announced, I was on my way in to go see my mother, and I was stopped, and they said there were no outside visitors, and we were able to finally see my mother from March. We saw her in August. So she's legally blind, in a wheelchair, does not do FaceTime well because she can't see us. You could see the deterioration from when we last saw her in March, and it was just devastating.
Well, and during the pandemic, the government said kind of all the right things, right? We're going to put an iron ring around long-term care homes. We're going to, temporarily bump your pay. We're going to do a few things here. Did that help? Was it enough?
No. Sorry.
Absolutely no, because
no.
I feel like they just put band-aids, but they're not fixing the real situation in long-term care. Like the pandemic pay is a big help that time because the government mandated, because most of the healthcare workers is working 2 jobs, just like me. If you have a part-time job, you work here, you work there, you work so many places, and then your body becomes so tired. You're emotionally, physically, and mentally stressed because every day you have to work in different places. So, and then there is no continuity of care to the residents. And that is really important, the connection between the residents and the healthcare workers. So for me, long-term care is a home for the resident. That is really important for the family members. But we need to include the workforce because that is our second home. And that is really important to tell to the government that the workforce is included inside the home because we are part of the home. I have a family, and the way I care to the family is the same way that I care to the residents. That's why I'm happy and I'm really proud that I am happy to take good care of the residents.
It's so true what you say. We've asked about staffing ratios, and I see the PSWs, RNs, RPNs running off their feet. I see that the RPNs, struggling, working double shifts, and then you get agency people coming in who don't know the person or aren't familiar with them or may not even really, look at their care plan. And being locked out during COVID, it was a lot harder because I wasn't sure whether or not my mother was getting fed on time. She was in her room, isolated for more than 5 months, getting sponge baths, not getting her hair washed in a proper bath or shower. The permanent staff there are the ones that really understand what her needs and wants are. You get people that don't have the time or don't know the person, and sure, they might get their meds on time, but what other quality of life do they have living in long-term care?
So things got so bad at one point that the military had to be called into some of the long-term care homes. And the stories coming out of there were something else, right? Having to read that as someone who's got family in there must have been very difficult. Having to work in those homes and, you're doing your best must also have been difficult to hear about as well.
I read the military report, and it took me 3 different times to go through it to finish it. And it's hard to believe that these homes are in Ontario, Canada, and it was disgusting to see human lives neglected, and that our government allowed it to happen. The government talked about this iron ring, pandemic pay, et cetera. I haven't seen anything change. Nothing has changed. There are no increase in staff. They've kept federal money. They haven't gone down to the provincial level, or the provincial level hasn't spent that money on long-term care where they should be spending it.
That is true, because when I read that one, for me, I feel like I don't blame the staff working there, because from the start, we are not protected, so we got infected. And then there is no help, there is no support, there is no adding staff. So what do you expect inside the long-term care? But if mostly of the staff are infected, who will work that day? So they end up really short. When you're giving care, you cannot be in a hurry. And absolutely no. But it's happening always, because we feel like the compassion is there, but our workload is excessive, adding more workloads, but not changing the ratio of the staff and the residents is making more unrealistic, and it's making more unsafe.
There's been a lot of comparisons made between what it was like for residents who are in for-profit care homes versus not-for-profit care homes. I guess from a family perspective, should there be a big profit made on delivering care for seniors?
Absolutely not. Having a for-profit home makes no sense. If you're looking at care for human beings, why should there be a profit? The for-profit homes are the ones that the military went into, the ones that they found residents abandoned because, like Jocelyn said, either the staff were infected or they were totally burnt out. I don't understand or can't even fathom how they worked one shift, yet alone double shifts. For-profit should never be in the same sentence as long-term care. The government, Doug Ford specifically talked about our healthcare heroes, and he thanked them with a cap of 1% increase. That's got to be the lowest form of acknowledgement to the healthcare staff. The difference between the for-profit, the not-for-profit, and the municipal homes in other provinces is astounding. They need to have national standards. It needs to be federally regulated so that standards of care are the same across every home, every province, for every human being. They're institutions right now.
We're heading into elections soon. What do you want people who are running to lead this province, like the Premier, what do you want them to know about long-term care and how to fix it?
If you want to see the long-term care workforce like the compassion, the care that they needed, the quality of care, they need to see, they need to fix the ratio of the residents between the residents and the staff. You need to start checking the residents every 15 minutes, doing head-to-toe assessment, doing all the paperwork mandated by the Ministry of Health to complete. You're putting the residents in risk and also the staff.
I would like to see going forward every member that is running for in the election live for 1 week in a long-term care home. And then they decide what needs to be done. Because they're obviously not listening to us. They're not listening to the lobbying groups. They're not listening to residents. They're not listening to staff. And the management of the homes, the boards, also need to live as a resident in long-term care for a week. I'd say a week. I don't think they'd survive a day, 24 hours. You know, we've got staff like Jocelyn who are so passionate about the residents there, and I swear my heart goes out to you, and I thank you for everything that you've done, especially during COVID. I haven't seen anything come out of the government right now, especially with all these deaths. Majority of them were in for-profit homes. I didn't see any shareholders returning their money that they received during those 2 years back into long-term care. We saw people dying and horrible deaths, horrible deaths.
The Ministry of Health, they need to come and go to the home and see what's going on. They need to stay with the PSW, what is on that, what they're doing on a daily basis, so they can see their own eyes how they work.
Yeah, even though politicians may not have been there day to day, no doubt they've seen the same stories as you have. They've heard similar stories of the challenges of both residents and staff. Do you think they care?
For me, no. Absolutely no. Because there is no action. We do our best to help the residents. But the problem is we're kind of like a machine. I feel like myself, I'm no longer a nurse. I feel like I'm a machine. I need to finish this and this and this and this. And the end of the day, I go home. I have a family. I work also inside our home. And my body is totally and physically, mentally. The mentally stress is true. Sometimes when I go inside, I showered, I cried. During the pandemic, I always cried because I see how the residents suffered. When the resident died, no one beside them, and it's traumatized us. For me, myself, it's traumatized me.
I don't think the government cares, because if they really did, things would change. Things would be different. I saw the staff and how much they do care and how much they saw my mother as an extended family member. When she was in palliative care in September, the RPN was working days. And she says, hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow. She says, my shift is over at 3. And at 3:30, she came back in to give my mother some hydromorphone. And I asked her, I said, why are you working? I said, are you staying later? She says, no, I'm doing a double shift. The person called in sick, and I didn't want an agency person looking after your mother tonight. She goes, I wanted to be here. So, I was so touched by that this woman was working a double shift just so that my mother could receive hydromorphone every 2 hours from her, as opposed to someone who didn't know her. So you could see how much they care. And our residents deserve better, staff deserve better, families deserve better. And no, they're not listening. The politicians are not listening, because something would have been changed by now. It would have been changed right from day one.
We work and we deliver the care like our own family. We take good care, we sacrifice. And I hope the government will sacrifice to help the residents, to provide the quality of care for the residents. And that's what we want.
Some of the challenges that you've outlined, it appears that the government is heading in sort of the same direction they've been in the past. They've awarded 30-year licenses to some of the homes that have been bad performers throughout this whole pandemic. How does that sit with you?
I feel like vomiting when I hear that. First of all, they talk about licenses. Their license equals a bed. A bed is where a human being sleeps. So they're not licenses, they're not beds. It's lives of people that are moving into those long-term care homes. So they've really institutionalized that phrase, and I wish the government would stop that. The number of licenses that have been given out, human lives going to live there, by the Ford government right now is unbelievable. And the majority of them have gone to those poor performers, those homes where the military went into. So they're giving these 30-year licenses as if, here's your ticket to the next 30 years of income for your shareholders. And the shareholders will be reaping the benefits, not the people living in those homes.
Julie, Jocelyn, thank you for being here and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having us.
And thank you all for tuning in. This has been Uninvited Working Ontario Women News. It's time for a segment that we call I'm Speaking. It's your chance to send us your thoughts, your concerns, whatever you're thinking about to actwow.ca. Record your 60-second message. Now, I'm speaking.
I'm speaking.
I have to
I'm
weigh
speaking. I'm speaking.
I have to
I'm
weigh
speaking. If you don't mind letting me finish. I'm speaking.
My name is Mary. I am a teacher and I live and work in the city of Vaughan. I want to use my voice as a female educator to let my provincial government know that pandemic exhaustion is very real. Female educators are living a more intense life. Working from home has been a complete disaster. I, like many other women, felt like I was failing everyone around me. My family, my children, my students, their parents, and most importantly, myself. I was glued to a screen for endless hours, many of those hours looking at icons without seeing the faces of my students. The days are long and hard with no breaks, because when I step away from my teacher duties, I immediately step into being a mom to my 3 children. I worry about their well-being. Time escapes me, and I am not nearly as present as I want to be, because I am trying to juggle it all. I feel like being worried, exhausted, and overwhelmed by the challenges we are facing is considered normal in a world of uncertainty with this government. Many of these issues have been around since before COVID. Smaller class sizes, the expanding role of technology, and the changing nature of what teachers are supposed to be doing. Yet, they have never been adequately addressed, and now COVID has really exposed all the cracks, and still nothing has been done. Our government needs to do more. They can provide adequate funding to ensure our kids remain in safe learning environments. I am frustrated with the people in power. Everyone knows that parents and students working from home is definitely not a solution, but it's not too late to do the right thing. Our government can still invest adequate funding in our education system, funding that is needed to keep our kids in school safely, funding for better ventilation, distancing in our classrooms, robust testing and tracing. I want schools open, but I also want them to be safe spaces for all of us. I don't believe any of us ever want to pivot back to online learning. It's not a real solution. The mental health of our students, our educators, our parents demands that we do better.